And welcome to Farm Journal Live. I am AgriTalk host Chip Flory. Glad that you could join us over the noon hour in the middle of the country. Another beautiful day here in the middle of the country. You know, every now and then a report comes out that is so interesting and so timely that we just need to get it covered. And right now, Rabo Research has a report out called "The Grain and Oilseed Sector in a Post-COVID-19 World: What Changes, What Stays, and How to Win." That's got my attention, and it was written by Steve Nicholson from Rabo AgriFinance. He's the senior grains and oilseed analyst for Rabo Research, and he joins us right now. Steve, thank you so much for making time for us. How are you?
Good, thanks, Chip. Good to be here.
Absolutely.
We have beautiful weather in St. Louis as well, so yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, a very timely topic because everybody is wanting to get to that post-COVID-19 world. When do you think that starts for us?
Well, I think, as I say in the beginning of this piece is, we start, we talked about this, and a lot of the trends that we talk about were already placed in place before we got to COVID. I think it'd be a little bit foolish to say, well, by January 2021, we're going to be out of this and we'll be here. I don't know that we know when this is going to be, when we're going to be in a post-COVID world, but it's probably sooner than later. But the thing we wanted to talk about was, and the reason part of this came up was, we had spent so much time once we got all locked down back in March and April, talking about COVID, what it meant, what it didn't mean, and, answering questions about it. And it got us all thinking about, well, okay, we know what a COVID world looks like because we're in the middle of it. But what does a post-COVID world look like? And that's the genesis and why we wanted to write this, so that people could start to think ahead and not just get so consumed by what's going on right now.
Yeah, Steve, when I think of post-COVID-19, I think of economic recovery, and that's going to play a major role in your outlook for the commodities.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things you think about when you look at it from a trade perspective, which is one of the 7 trends that we identified is trade changing, is that as we are in an economic recession and you look over time, any economic recession, you see trade contract because people don't have the money to stockpile. They don't have money to finance inventories. And so trade really changes. And that was one of the big identifiers for us, is that as before, we're getting away from multilateral trade agreements to doing the more local or bilateral or regional trade agreements as countries start to think about, what do I need to survive another COVID event? What do I need to be, make sure I'm in charge of my own destiny rather than to depend on somebody else. And that's one of the things when we look at these, they all kind of overlap each other, and they have a lot of intertwining going, and trade being a good example of that.
Yeah. So did you mention seven trends that you see coming in post-COVID?
Yep. So I'll just name them down, then we can talk about them individually with questions. So first of all, the trade issue is one of the big ones, and that gets intertwined with the issue of food security. Countries thinking, I don't want to be in a situation before where I don't know whether I'm going to get my shipment because of COVID or whatever the case might be. And so we see food security. And one of the quotes in the paper is, it's no longer just in time, it's just in case. I want to be prepared for that. And there's a lot of things around that security issue. It's a short to medium term issue where we're building stocks, but as we go down the road and those stocks remain high, and there's always the issue of how that means for money, that kind of means a little bit maybe of a cloud over the G&O sector, in the sense that we have these big inventories, so we don't need to take prices up to ration. But increased government intervention, and that also goes back to trade, also goes back to farm income, and particularly when you look in the U.S., where it is, the government's going to be more a part of our net farm income, or the farm income on the farm as we go forward. We've certainly seen that in 20, and we think that will be the case as we go forward. One of the big ones that we don't talk about much is consumer behavior. Think about the consumer today. If you think of post-COVID, in a pre-COVID world, we were eating 50% of our meals or more outside the home. So we weren't going to the grocery store. Now you think about when we did go to the grocery store, then we were going to the dairy section, the deli section, the meat section, fresh produce, and that was it. And the middle of the store, as we always joke, was sort of a desert. Now you go to the grocery store, and that's changed. People are all over that store. They're in the middle of the store. They're buying all sorts of things. And that benefits the G&O sector because people are buying cereal. They're buying pasta. They're buying products that have grains and oil seeds in them. So that's good for the sector as well. Biofuel is one of the other ones. Biofuel was struggling before, particularly when we look at ethanol. And now think about a post-COVID world. And I'm going to kind of pick on the urban centers because that's where it's going to happen the most. Think about urban centers and what people are not doing. They're working from home. I mean, we're both working from home. So we're not commuting to work, so we're not burning gasoline. People who live in urban centers, they don't really want to get on a bus or a train. They may figure out a different way to get to work, which might be by bicycle, or they maybe walk or move someplace so they're closer to work or continue to work from home. Think about vacations. Think about what the airline industries. They're not using fuel. Now, that's not a big ethanol thing, but they're not using fuel, which is not good overall for the whole energy complex.
Right.
So all that's changed, and and electric cars and all that's still going on. The other thing we've talked about, one of the things we identified is the digital, and I could never get this word right, digitalization of the supply chains. So think about as food safety in particular, think about what consumers want. They want their food because, for the first time, and it was going to the grocery store and during the middle of a lockdown, and you didn't find stuff on the store. It's like, I've never gone to the grocery store and not be able to find flour or butter or anything like that. So the consumer now is going to think about food safety and food security. So they also want to know, where's that food coming from? Now they may become much more aware of that now. And so that digitization of the supply chain will help keep track of that. Also may change the farm input sector and think about, the consumer, we think Amazon and people go to Amazon. Well, think about the farmers now may not go to that local DC or that local store to pick up their fertilizer, chemicals, whatever. They may order it from far away and it may deliver directly to the farm. The last thing I think is the feed side. This is going to have a long tail for G&O. Now for chickens, they can make a pretty quick turn. Hogs a little bit slower, but think about the beef cycle. And the beef cycle, they're still working through that backlog. And as that price gets a little bit, stingier, the profit margin gets stingy, there's a lot less feed being used. And so you have a long tail of feed demand in the G&O sector that I think we also have to keep in mind and think about what that means. And it's one of the things that we have discovered is, even since we wrote this paper and during the middle of it, was when we looked at the food service sector and think about they've had this on again, off again, where it just died. And then it came back and now it's died again.
Right.
So those are the big ones.
Yeah. Steve, there's nothing on that list that doesn't have a direct impact on farm revenue.
Absolutely not. I mean, the farmer it starts at that farm gate. And if it doesn't, we don't understand it, it's going to be in a situation where the farmer is not going to be in a very good competitive advantage. So the farmer, as with the whole supply chain, and this is really the whole food supply chain, they've got to be innovative and they've got to be flexible. They've got to be, nimble. One of the things that COVID did was exposed, while the food system was very efficient, it also exposed the vulnerabilities of that.
Yes.
And that's the thing that we all have to think about. And the farmer it starts on the farm. They've got to be able to adapt to that and think about, okay, how do I make sure I produce the right crops, get it to market safely, and also and make sure I get my inputs that I need as well, because that's the other thing that could happen as well.
Right. You're getting into the next thing that I want to talk about, which is how a farmer sticks around for the post-COVID-19 experience and is in the winter box. Okay. Yeah,
that's the challenge, and we came into this with that challenge as well. But we've talked about a couple of things that we need to think about when we looked at. Now, technology is part of this. The farmer who is able to adapt to the new technology and it's coming at them faster than ever before is going to be one of those winners. How do they keep track of, can they do some IP work? Can they keep track of what their costs are by keeping all that data lined up? And that's always been the challenge, is getting all the systems to talk to each other. And that's part of it. The second thing is to look at new demand channels. And we know coming into this, we looked at corn, soybeans, wheat, and we'll pick on the big three. That demand side was a challenge. What do we do? What do we do different? And this is a controversial topic, but let's think about this as an example. There's organic, there's non-GMO, there's plant-based proteins. Yeah. Is there an opportunity for you to plant, beans or peas that could be used in that process that are profitable? The other thing too, and we talked about government payments up front, make sure you understand what those government payments are and have a pretty good idea of what you're going to get in the year, because if you understand, that makes your revenue side look better, and your bank understands where you are, and the banker looks and goes, oh, he does understand, or she understands what her revenue stream is. You have a lot more things to manage and keep track of. And I know it seems overwhelming at times, but that's the reality we're in at this point.
Yeah. Steve, one of the trends that you've identified here that we can't underplay here is the changes in the consumer behaviors.
Yep.
That
Absolutely.
is so important, and how they've gotten back to shopping in the middle of the grocery store. It's fascinating thoughts.
Yeah. And that's one of the things we've talked about for years, and now COVID has exposed it and also made us focus on it more, is what does the consumer want? Now it really gets, because think about this when you think about the grocery store and think about our food purchases. Before COVID, as I said, we were buying 51% of our food outside the home. Now we may be bringing it back home to eat, but we're still purchasing outside of a grocery store. Yep. Now you think about that, and the grocery stores were, sized and focused on, providing that 50% of food. Now, let's say it's 90% of all that food we buy comes from the grocery store versus that. And that changes, what does the processor want? What's the food manufacturer want? They may think about the flour industry. There's a lot more demand for flour. And so we've got to have wheat that meets those flour specifications for the grocery store. So it changes the whole dynamics of that supply chain. And the farmer needs to be aware of that and understand what is it his end user, if you have it, needs from him from a production standpoint.
Yeah, it takes so much forethought to prepare for some of these changes in consumer habits or behavior. Yep. Just simply because we're talking about a crop year. You've got to be prepared when you're making your acreage decisions for the next year.
Yeah, and not to put too fine a point on that, but you're exactly right. We only produce one crop a year, so you have to put a lot of forethought in it. And second of all, and I'm going to kind of beat on the consumer, the consumer is extremely fickle. And so the consumer has to understand the food system doesn't move that fast to meet their needs tomorrow, because you think about crops, like you just said, it takes a year to produce a crop. That doesn't happen overnight. We don't generally produce 2 crops a year. We don't do a lot of double crop in the United States. Maybe that's something we need to think about. Maybe there's a different way we produce the grains and oilseeds we do now, and we do more double cropping in those climates that allow us to do that.
Right. Fascinating stuff. Can biofuels be on the winner list of this, or is that going to be a tough one to manufacture?
I think that's a tough one to manufacture when we think about what's happening to the consumer and their habits as far as how much they're driving, what they're driving, and all the environmental issues around, the internal combustion engine. Now, the other part of that is there other uses for ethanol, production of power, in jet fuel, things like that. So there's that research side that, we really haven't spent a lot of time with. Well, I shouldn't say that. We spent time with it, but maybe we haven't focused on it as much as we should to think about where are the other opportunities for ethanol or biodiesel and things like that. It is a challenge is going to be, and part of it too is because it's a government, and I hate to say this, government supported program, but in a sense, because you have a mandate, there is a little bit of a cushion there, and maybe we need to think about what is it in a post-cushion world of ethanol or ethanol and biofuels. What do we do? And that may force us to think a little hard about what we should be doing.
Yeah. Well, I think most of the farmers out there would just soon throw the government involvement, the increased government involvement off your list there, Steve. But unfortunately, that's the world we're living in right now.
That's right. And I think we'd all like to have less government in our lives. I don't think that's an unfair statement at all. But, the reality is of it right now, when you look at prices, the government is going to support those prices. It's also it's a risk management tool we have to have on the farm. And I think that, if the government could figure out a way to work with the biofuels and make that world easier or better for all, I think that would be better for the whole industry overall.
Yeah, excellent. We ought to get together sometime real soon, Steve, and talk about what the price impact might be.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to do that. We're going to do that.
We're going to do that later. Exactly.
Exactly. We're going to do that this afternoon, 2:06 Central Time on AgriTalk. Steve's going to be my guest. We're also going to talk protein with Don Close, who is the animal side of, Steve's equivalent on
Exactly.
the animal side for Rabo Research. Really looking forward to that conversation this afternoon. Thank you so much, Steve. That is Steve Nicholson. He is the Senior Grains and Oilseed Analyst for Rabo Research and Rabo AgriFinance. Thank you so much for listening to Farm Journal Live. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Chip. Good to talk to you.